How's it going, folks? It's Rob here. I knocked together the little aquaponic system you can see behind me. It's a little chop and flip barrel jobby for an aquaponic workshop I held with Saviour Soil Permaculture a couple of weeks back, and I've been pretty chuffed with the results. I posted a couple of pictures to social media, Facebook and Instagram and whatnot, and have quite a few people wanting to know, how you put one of these little jobbies together. So this is basically a scaled down version of the Chop and Flip Aquaponic IBC system. I posted a clip on a couple of weeks back. The beauty of this one though is it's small enough that you could pretty much well tuck it away anywhere, and it'd fit on a small balcony in a small courtyard, or even on a front landing if it's large enough for you. And it pretty much all gives anyone a chance to grow a couple of greens or herbs aquaponically. I mean, you could toss a couple of ornamentals in there if you just wanted to make a nice floral arrangement with a couple of goldfish swimming underneath. Just quickly, the plumbing parts for today's build should be available from most plumbing, irrigation or hardware supply stores. The tools I'm going to use are a rechargeable drill, jigsaw, hacksaw, utility knife, ruler, marker pen and a few other odds and ends like my little PVC pipe cutter. So this drum here was picked up from a local feed store. If you're in a more urban setting, you might want to try online trading groups and sites like Gumtree or Craigslist, as they often have drums and barrels and containers offered on there. The best containers to use for aquaponics are ones that have had foodstuffs or liquids that are easy to clean out. I'm not too worried about this one as it smelled pretty fruity and sweet, so it's probably some sort of a drink concentrate. I'll still be giving it another good clean out once the grow bed's been cut off the top. When looking at barrels, if you get a chance, just check out the bungs and make sure they got a good rubber seal. It just saves you having to seal them later. This one here had a pressure relief valve in it, so I unscrewed it, took out the little valve and siliconed it up with a fish grade silicone. Just check your aisle at the hardware or plumbing store for a fish grade one suitable for aquariums. To mark out the grow bed itself, I came down from the top roughly around about 19 centimeters or 7.5 inches and just placed a few dots with a permanent marker. I then went along and just joined them up using my flexible metal ruler. If you don't have a flexible metal ruler, maybe some sort of flexible plastic straight edge would do the same job. Next, I drilled through a hole for the jigsaw blade to be started off in. With the barrel itself, I'm using a timber blade with this one here. I just find that they don't clog up as fast as the metal blades, but do be careful when you're using it. If you push too hard, you will cut outside the lines. I'm also cutting, as you can see, on a blue tarp here because I don't want these little blue plastic flecks all through the lawn and aquaponics area. Once the cuts were made, I cleaned up the burrs along the edges using the side of my utility knife blade. Do be careful if you use the blade because these little fellas are very sharp. I've actually gone out and purchased a deburring tool to make this job a lot easier and slightly safer in the future. Now, as for access ports so you can get in to muck around with the plumbing and look at the fish and feed the fish and whatnot, I'm using a very basic little template. For the access port at the rear, I'm just going to use a takeaway container lid. And what I'm going to do is pop it roughly 50 mil or 2 inches from the top lip. Just going to get this lid and draw a line around. I'm going to put a couple of pilot holes here around the front. What I'm going to be doing is marking down 50 mil in 2 spots, because here I've made up a bit of a template using the takeaway lid just to form the 2 sides here, and then join them together using a ruler. So that will be our front viewing port. Now, you don't have to go with something like this. A lot of people, as you would have seen if you've searched around barrelponics online, you'd see people cut in a little fish shape in the front here, a little bit of a novelty idea. I think that's fantastic. You could do like a whale or whatever you want really, but I'm just sticking with this. Just gives a larger area, a larger viewing port for kids to have a bit of a gander at the fish inside. So there we go, a bit of a rough mark out there. Just to make it easier to cut with the jigsaw, I'm going to put a couple of pilot holes here and then we'll get to cutting it up. So I'm starting off the jigsaw in the pilot holes, and again, just be careful how hard you push the jigsaw through because it doesn't take much for you to go offline and end up with a slightly larger hole. Just a bit of a tip, it does help if you can straddle the barrel when you make the cuts. It just helps keep it steady if you're a one-man show. So once the cuts were made, I went around all the surfaces with the edge of my utility knife blade just to knock off any of the loose burrs that were hanging around. So now we've got to drill a couple of holes in the grow bed, one to allow water to come up from the pump and the other to allow it to fall back down into the fish tank via the bell siphon. So the first cut I'm going to make, it will need to take this little tank fitting or bulkhead fitting. It's a 20mm or 3/4 inch one. For that I'm using a 29mm or 1 1/8 hole saw. It's just large enough to take the thread and should give us a nice cozy fit. So the bulkhead fitting needs to be far away enough from the side of the grow bed so a 90mm media guard made from a stormwater pipe can be placed over the top of it. Clear up the edges with the deburrer. For the water coming into the bed from the pump, I'm using this little 20mm or 3/4 inch PVC fitting. It's got a thread on the end. That will allow another fitting to thread onto it underneath the bed. There's just a little O-ring there that'll help give it a nice watertight seal. Now for this jobby here, I'm using a 25mm or 1 inch hole saw. It's going to be a very snug fit. So once the hole was drilled, I just got in there with my new little deburring tool and just gave it a bit of a clean up. It was actually a snug enough fit that I got to screw the valve fitting in. So I'm ready to connect the grow bed on top of the fish tank, and what I'll be using today are these little zip ties. They're a UV stabilised zip ties, so they shouldn't break down in the sun at all, and they're going to be more than secure just to hold a grow bed full of light clay media, especially since the grow bed itself will be sitting on this little lip here on top of the edge of the fish tank below, so the weight will be taken by the fish tank itself. I've already drilled 6 holes through. Unfortunately, I thought I'd press record on the camera, but I haven't. But basically what I've done is I've come along and in 6 positions around the top of the grow bed and fish tank, I've zapped the holes, and that'll pretty much will be what takes these UV stabilised zip ties. So with these zip ties, I'm going to be feeding them in from the inside, so the little locking mechanism is out of sight. It's in through this hole here and down around again. We have the grow bed on. I'll just go around and tighten these guys up. Also too, these little tails, you can just get under there with a pair of scissors or your utility knife and just chop them off. So now that the grow bed's on nice and securely and we've got the holes zapped through the top, we can start to work on the plumbing. So to begin with, we'll start with the pump. Now this one here is a 1200 litre an hour job. The other one I have in the existing barrel system is a 750 litre an hour pump. I just don't think it has quite enough oomph. That's why I've decided to upgrade to this one for this system, and I'll be swapping one of these into the other barrel system once I'm done. So to begin with, we need to run the water from here up into the grow bed. What I'm going to be using is this flexible aquarium grade pipe. So it's pretty easy to attach, just push it straight onto the fitting on top of the pump. Now what I'm going to be doing is inserting one of these T's above the water line here, and what that's going to do is it's going to allow me to place on a little valve here, and this valve will allow water to shoot over the surface of the water of the fish tank, oxygenating it, and it'll also give me some level of flow control to the inlet in the grow bed. So I think that's a pretty decent height there. So what I might do is I'll just cut this pipe here. You might find you need to heat up this hose a little bit just so it stretches to take the fitting. So I'm just going to run a little section of hose from this part of the T into the valve. And now we only want a little bit here, just enough to get over that barb. So we'll cut him off around about there, I think. Move the finger, and then we'll just push him onto the side of the T-piece. So this section here will go into another piece of hose that will then be pushed onto this nut and tail fitting that will screw onto the valve socket that comes through the grow bed. Just to give you a quick look at this nut and tail, it's a 20mm barbed one that screws onto a standard hose tap via a little adapter that screws into the top. The valve socket that's going through the top of the grow bed also has an O-ring on there just to make sure it's a watertight seal. All sorted out. So now I'm just going to pop this little valve connector through this hole, if I can find it. Need to screw him down a little bit. So now we're just going to screw the nut onto the adapter that's on the valve socket and then connect it to the pump. And that little lead will end up going through the little service port we have up the back there once we have all the rest of the plumbing sorted out. Now this valve socket needs a section of pipe pushed into it to take the water to the top of the grow bed, and on top of that I'm just going to be pushing on a little 20mm or 3/4 inch tee, and we'll just have a little bit of water coming over either side. Now you can go and get ornamental fountain heads and that sort of thing. Make sure it's not something that's going to spray all around the place, just drop the water back into the top of the grow bed. Now for the height of this standpipe, I'm pretty much all coming up probably about 30mm or 1.25 inches just above the top of the grow bed there, popping a mark. Now I'm going to use my PVC pipe cutters, but you can also just use a hacksaw. So that now just gets pushed into there. To secure the standpipe into the valve socket, I'm running through a pilot hole and then zapping in a 316 stainless steel screw. You could glue it in place if you want. I just figure using the stainless steel screw method means that I can reclaim the parts if I decide to modify the system later. Now just on top of that, we're just going to have this little fitting here. So to begin with the drain side of the build, we'll have a look at the shroud first. This is the media guard that will stop the media from getting in and clogging up the bell siphon. The media shroud for this siphon was a 200mm length, or just under 8-inch length, of 90mm or 3.5-inch stormwater pipe. Now I've cut it at that length so it's standing proud of the top of the grow bed by about 1 centimetre or just 1/2 inch. That gives you a bit of extra room to take the lid on and off when you need to inspect the bell siphon. Something I like to add onto the base of the media guards of these bell siphons is an end cap with some holes drilled in the base and a couple of 316 stainless steel screws zapped through. What that does is it stops the shroud from being lifted out, allowing media to get into the bell siphon workings and just gumming it all up. For this media shroud, I'm drilling a series of holes all around it, and what that will do is allow water to pass through into the bell siphon, but it will keep the media out so it doesn't gum up the works. To begin with, what I've done is drilled a series of pilot holes just in a rough pattern, and then I've come back through and I've finished them off with an 8mm or 5/16 drill bit. The 8mm hole is small enough that it'll stop any of the small bits of clay passing through, but still allow a nice amount of water to come through and activate the siphon. So after all the 8mm holes were drilled into the shroud and the end cap, I've just come around with the utility knife and just cleaned up any sharp edges or any loose burrs that are around the edge of the cut. Then I flipped the whole unit over so the end cap's facing up. I've taken a 29mm or 1 1/8 inch hole saw and just run that through the bottom after I've drilled in a little pilot hole. Through this hole we're going to be placing a bulkhead fitting or a water tank fitting, which will take the water from the siphon back into the fish tank below. So on top of my shrouds, I like to pop on an end cap just to stop any debris getting in there and fouling up the works. Now this one fits on fairly loosely, but different brand pipes you might find that the lid sticks. On another bell siphon I've built, what I've done is I've cut out little sections on the side of this end cap here, and that just makes it a little bit looser and it fits on a lot easier. What you don't want is the cap to be stuck on there and very hard for you to pull off. So for the install, we start with the shroud, and what we're going to do is pop a rubber washer just down around the hole. Then we're going to pop down our shroud base plate, just making sure that one of the holes is pointing towards the middle, so it'll be easy to get the screw in. Then another washer, then in goes the tank fitting, and then on the underside we're just going to screw up the nut. Just do him up hand tight. So next I like to screw on a faucet elbow or a faucet socket on the tail end of the tank fitting. The reason being is when you tighten it up, you can actually undo the nut that holds this in position, and it's a lot easier to tighten up now than when the grow bed's full of media and you may loosen it off and cause all sorts of issues. This faucet elbow is a great one if you can find it. Our large hardware chains don't stock them anymore, so I bought this from a plumbing supply. Alternatively, you can get a faucet socket. What this is a threaded fitting to go on to the tank fitting, and then on the other side you can just push on a normal slip 20mm or 3/4 inch elbow. The reason you want an elbow at the end here is the water will come down here, get a little bit of a resistance to it. It will help create the water lock in the bell siphon and help the bell siphon to initiate. So on this build today, I'm just going to use this little jobby here just because it looks nice and neat. So we'll get down there and we'll screw him in. I'm not using any Teflon plumbing tape on these fittings, mainly because the seal is so tight I don't think it will ever leak. Just make sure that the tank fitting is all nice and tight still. Now into that I'm just going to push a small section of pipe with a 90-degree elbow. and that will help just redirect the water down onto the surface of the fish tank. There we go. So now onto the standpipe for the bell. What we've got here is a little valve socket. It's just going to screw straight into the tank fitting like such. And then we need a section of pipe to act as a standpipe. And on the very top of that, what we're going to do is pop on a 25mm to 20mm reducer. What that does is it allows a greater volume of water to enter over the top of the standpipe, create a water lock in there and initiate your siphons a lot easier. Now what I like to do is have the top of the standpipe roughly about 50mm from the top of the grow bed. What that means is that will be as far as the water comes up, and it allows for about 20 to 25mm of dry media above the top of the water line in the bed when it's full, and also gives you a bit of a lip just to stop the media from falling out. So I've already measured up the standpipe for this one, and I need to cut it off at roughly 75mm. So now that little standpipe just gets pushed into there, and the reducer on top. Over the top of the standpipe we need a bell. This is actually the one from the other barrel system I've made up. It's a section of 50mm or 2-inch drain pipe with a couple of legs cut out. This just allows water into the standpipe, and a very tight fitting end cap on there. And all that does is sit over the top there. For this build though, I've made one out of a clear plastic drink bottle just to keep it a little bit cheaper, less parts you have to buy. And also too, it looks groovy to see the siphon initiate and then break. To make the little clear bell, it was very easy. I took a 50mm or 2-inch diameter drink bottle, measured down roughly 170mm, which is around about 6.5 inches, popped a series of dots around the bottle itself, and then cut off the top using my utility knife. And then in 3 positions around that cut edge, I marked up roughly 1/2 inch or 15mm, drew a couple of lines across, and then cut out the 3 sections. Those 3 sections will allow water through to the standpipe and allow the bed to drain. So now I'm just going to pop the shroud in there. Just make sure these little marks down here line up. That means the screw will go through neatly. Pop the screw in, pop the bell in, and we're all ready to go. So I'm just going to clean out the clay in this large tub of water, give it a bit of a swish around just to remove any dust particles from it that could wreak havoc with the fish's gills. Then I'm just going to ladle it straight into the grow bed using an old sieve with the handle that's broken off. If you don't have something like that you can use, drill a couple of holes in the base of an old ice cream container or some other sort of plastic container, and they make a perfect sieve for something like this. If you're going to use rock, it does pay to give it a bit of a clean first as well, and I'd also probably give it a bit of a vinegar test just to see if it's going to release any carbonates into the water. You can check out that clip up there or in the description just to see how I've done that previously. So there you go folks, she came together really well, looking rather schmicko there next to her sister. The siphon's just fired, so I think I've pretty much got that all sorted out. So what we might do is we might pop down underneath, and I'll show you how you can adjust the flow rates to get your siphon firing correctly. So here's a bit of a look at the fish tank. As you can see, first off, the water's pretty clear. You can see the pump down there. There's still a little bit of dust down there, but yeah, that should settle within a couple of days. I have made one alteration to the plumbing on this side over here. I've added a small section of hose and a 90-degree angle, mainly because I sort of miscalculated at the back there, and some of the water was splashing out that access port, so I thought it better to redirect it down the side. So you can see there's water coming out of that valve over the back there. That's because if I had it totally closed off, there'd be far too much water running up to the grow bed, and the bell siphon would initiate and never break. Conversely, if I didn't have enough water running up into the grow bed, you get a little trickle over the top of the standpipe. It just keeps running out through the drain down the bottom here and never actually initiate. So all you need to do is just play around with that valve setting, just turn it on and off just a little bit at a time, and you should be able to have the bell siphon initiating and breaking within about 15 to 20 minutes. And the siphon is initiated. And there's the burp, and she's done. So that took 1:15 seconds from the first dribble till the burp on the siphon. So that's not too bad at all. So once you've got the bell siphon firing and you're pretty happy with the way it's going, you can pop some plants straight into the system. I've got a little clip up there you can suss out, just showing you a bit of a shortcut of how I like to plant plants out in our larger aquaponic system. You could probably use it here as well. Once those plants are in though, it does pay to give them a little bit of nutrients just to help kick them off. What I like to do is just add a little bit of seaweed solution. You don't need much in a system this size. Probably about quarter to half a teaspoon would be more than you need to add some nutrients in there for some young seedlings. I actually use a little kelp powder concentrate, so pretty much all I'd add only about quarter of a teaspoon of that in there. It will discolour the water slightly, but it won't harm the fish at all. Speaking of fish, for a system this size, you're pretty much all looking at around about 10 to 12 fish. I actually asked the folks down at the local aquarium and they recommended no more than 12 for a system this size, goldfish that is. If you haven't kept fish before, it might pay for you to ask them just, how to release goldfish into a system like this. I've got a clip up there on how we've done it in larger aquaculture and aquaponic systems, but yeah, just with goldfish, you might as well ask the experts while you're there buying the fish. Now, some people have said that the goldfish food doesn't have enough crude protein in it to run a system like this. I actually asked the guys down there at the aquarium how much protein was in their feeds, and most of them came in around about between 30 to 40%, which is roughly the same amount as commercial feeds as well that we use for our silver perch and jade perch in those large tanks up there. So as for nutrients going into the system, goldfish will run something like this no problem whatsoever. So as you can see, it's a pretty easy little system to build. You can probably knock it together in half a day to a day, depending on if you've got to run around and buy tools and bits and pieces you forgot, like myself. If you're interested in a slightly larger version of this, I've posted a Chop and Flip IBC build clip. You can check that out up there. That's using one of those large 1,000 litre or 250 gallon cage tanks that you see floating around. So if you enjoyed the clip and you're into backyard farming and aquaponics and whatnot, feel free to share this around the online communities. You can also subscribe if you want. You can hit that little button up there. Then you can check a little box and you'll be sent an email every time we upload a clip to YouTube, and you can come along and see what's going on. I'll pop a couple of thumbnails there for you to suss out on a few other bits and pieces we do around the place as well. I do hope everyone is well and happy and that you've enjoyed the clip, and I will catch you next time. Cheers, folks. So I thought I'd give you a bit of a look at how the bell siphon works. I've got the shroud removed and just the clear bottle over the top, and as you can see, the water's slowly moving up the side of the standpipe till it reaches the point where it starts to cascade over. There's so much water coming over the lip there that it creates a water lock and a siphon is initiated. Now, as there's no media in this bed, it's going to take a lot longer than it normally would to drain. As the water level reaches the base and the cutouts down there, air has started to suck through, and eventually the siphon is broken with a big burp. So there you go. I thought I'd just give you a bit of a quick look at how the bell siphon itself works.